Je pense sans cesse à toi.
Hello and welcome to The Foretop. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot-button topics in food and beverage. I'm your host, Catherine Cole. Episode 43 is all about contemporary bar business and culture. First, we'll get a primer on modern bar etiquette. Next, designing the ideal space for mixing cocktails and encouraging mingling among clientele. And our third course is all about the hidden costs of running a bar. How much does that oversized ice cube really cost? Today we are not recording in the studio at OPB. Instead, we are in Portland's Nob Hill neighborhood at the Aria Gin Tasting Room on 23rd Avenue, which is a well-known shopping and dining street here. It's a great location, and they also make delicious cocktails here, so I think we will maybe get a little jollier as the episode goes on as we sip a delicious spring cocktail that the folks at Aria mixed up for us. It is a Portland 75 made with Aria dry gin, lemon juice, vermouth, and soda water. And the vermouth is Coqui Americano Rosa. So it's a beautiful pink spring cocktail that we're enjoying. I'm joined for this episode by Jeffrey Morgenthaler, author of the new book, Drinking Distilled, A User's Manual. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi.
And Jim Meehan, author of the new book, Meehan's Bartender Manual. Hi.
Hello.
And Jacob Grier, author of Cocktails on Tap, The Art of Mixing Spirits and Beer. Good to see you again, Jacob.
Good to be back.
Now for our first course. The social mores around dining and drinking can be baffling to many of us, whether it's picking up the proper fork or leaving your napkin on the table when you leave. And there are also manners that should be observed in the context of a sophisticated bar. Jeffrey Morgenthaler, your new book, Drinking Distilled, devotes quite a bit of ink to bar etiquette, so I'd like to start with you.
Fine.
What are some courtesies that every bar patron should observe?
You know, when I wrote this book, I set out to do something a little bit more than your usual grouchy, old, crusty bartender rant, which is usually something along the lines of have your money ready, have your order ready, don't waste my time, make sure you tip in cash, that kind of stuff. I feel like those sort of etiquette lessons are tired and generally not helpful. I really wanted to remind people that bartenders, most of us do this because it's fun, and most of us are pretty good at it. And we want you to have fun as much as you want to have fun. And there are things that I think some people do that kind of turn a fun time into sort of an unpleasant business interaction. So there are all those sorts of basic kind of manners things. I
need some examples.
I talk a lot about not just how you treat your bartender, but how you treat the other patrons in the bar. I think that's really important. I think that what people don't really think about much is that bartenders are essentially responsible for doling out what could be a very dangerous drug to a room full of people. And if we pick up on the sense that you might not be super thoughtful of your fellow person, we're not as inclined as we might want to be to fill you full of alcohol. And so one of our primary concerns is the safety and general well-being of everybody else in the room. So anything that you can do to indicate that you're a good person will kind of calm us.
You were encouraging interruptions, so I'll jump right in for Jeff here. One of my favorite parts about Jeff's book is the part where he explains that guests actually have the right to get up and leave. For instance, if they go to a bar and sit at a table for 10 minutes and no one comes over and greets them or clears their table or asks them for their drink order. So I think that, as Jeff was saying, it's not like a Bernard DeVoto 1972 Trader Vic sort of like gruff, grumpy, I've been here, this is what you're supposed to do. But there's a Bill of Rights, I think, that he's sort of introduced there that's not just about the way bartenders want to be treated, but that empowers, I think, guests to understand, like, hey, this is like a sort of social contract that you're entering, and it's totally an elective, and that you're really voting with your dollars. So If you go into a bar and you don't like what you're seeing, leave and don't come back.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the bartender, not only are you kind of an artist creating these very creative beverages, but you're also sort of a policeman, and you also have to have the gracious hospitality aspect that keeps the customer from leaving. It seems like that's a lot on your shoulders.
It's a lot. It's in some ways it's a really easy job. In some ways it's a really hard job. I don't like to think of ourselves as police officers, but we do have to have in the back of our minds that we're a room full of drunken people at any time, and part of that is us remaining sober, us kind of keeping and getting rid of problems before they arise.
Our job, I think, is to take care of people, and I think safety is at the most fundamental part of the social contract. That when you come to our bars, we're not going to poison you, and we're not going to allow you to poison yourselves, or So I think
each other.
So I think it's something that you hopefully never have to say, but I think in some ways, I think Jeff's book sort of goes up into the line and looks over that cliff and sort of says, like, this is what we're trying to do. We need your help.
Yeah. So Jacob, you consult with bar owners. What are some kind of rules of thumb that you teach people that maybe that hadn't occurred to them until you say, this is the way things are done?
You're talking about on the customer side or on the bartender side?
Either side.
Well, I think one of the things we've touched on a little bit here is, I think we've all seen over the course of our career this shift from when we started out, it was a struggle to get respect as a bartender and to make that a respected profession. Whereas now that pendulum has swung so much the other way that we'll sometimes have guests coming to us and wanting to be completely in our hands and not even being willing to express their preference. Yeah. And so, especially at a place like the Multnomah Whiskey Library where I come in sometimes, we'll have people who come in and they say, I don't like whiskey, but I'm here with this group and I feel like I have to have whiskey here.
Yeah.
And that's not the attitude we want.
You don't.
Right. We're like, we don't have to have whiskey. We can pour you wine. We can pour you beer. We can do anything else. And
we should explain, Multnomah Whiskey Library is a very fancy, it's almost like a private bar in Portland.
Yeah, it's a very high-end bar, but we always want to be professional and, like we said, to give people a good time. So I would say to guests, a good rule of thumb is, come in and be willing to express yourself and tell us what you want. Don't feel like you have to have what we want to serve you. It's not about us. It's still always about the guest, and we're there to help facilitate the kind of interaction they want. And if they want to put themselves in our hands and just give us very broad outlines about what they'd like to be given, then that's great. And if they very specifically want the same thing they were drinking in the 1980s, happy to do that too.
Oh, so that's you won't laugh if we ask for this.
No.
Okay. I feel like I learned quite a few things in your book, Jeffrey. I didn't know the thing about putting the coaster over your glass to mark your place. Is there anything else that we should know as customers? Kind of inside tips?
One thing that always kind of irks us in the year 2018 is the pulling the bartender aside and saying, "Hey, send that woman down at the end of the bar a drink."
Ew.
Yeah, exactly. Ew. We used to go have a conversation with the person and say, "Look, there's somebody down at the end of the bar that wants to buy you a drink. You can accept it, or you can decline. It doesn't matter to me. If you accept it, they're probably going to come over and talk to you. If you decline, no harm, no foul." And nowadays, I think we just say no. We're not that kind of bar. It's not really. I don't think it's this chivalrous move anymore. I think it just comes off as creepy.
Today, that guy's probably sitting at the bar on a Tinder anyway, so
yeah,
he may not be making eye contact with anyone in the room.
No, yeah. So things like that are in the book. It feels weird to have to explain it. Sometimes it's just sort of like basic social behaviors, but honestly, after 22 years behind the bar, I have to say, we really do have to explain basic kind of social behavior to some people.
Well, and hasn't the role of the bar changed somewhat as appreciation of fine cocktails has grown among the general populace? I feel like, it used to be you'd go into a bar to get tipsy, or like that was the point.
Yeah.
Where now you go in and the point is to have a really interesting, experience of aromatics and flavor, and just I want to try that one. Oh, I want to try that one. You go with your friends and you try this, have a sip of this, and it's more about enjoying the beverage than some sort of
I wish that
socialist
were the case, but it's
no.
I would say that maybe instead of 1% of the people coming in for that experience, now 7% maybe come in, or 6%.
Come on, no.
But for the most part, those that number has grown exponentially to 7%. But 93% of the people who come are still coming for the booze and for the communality. I mean, the one thing that I always say to people who are thinking that we're going to be replaced by robots or whatever, is just that people come to drink in bars and eat in restaurants to be around other people. That's why they come.
Yeah, it's I've always thought of the bars as sort of a sacred social space. We talk about those in architecture. It's the bar, the tavern, the inn. Going back centuries as being a part of the community. And that's never going to go away. So, what Jim I think is really touching on is that you're getting it to the sort of the core of what it means to have a bar.
Well, now that you've mentioned architecture, I think we have to move on to our next course, which is about design.
That was my segue.
Excellent segue. Bars are challenging spaces both for those mixing the drinks and those trying to order them. Jim Meehan, a whole chapter of your new book, Meehan's Bartender Manual, is devoted to bar design. And you also recently opened a Frank Lloyd Wright-inspired bar in Chicago called Prairie School. So I want to hear from you. Just tell me about what differentiates good bar design from bad bar design? What do you think about when you think about the design of a bar?
I think that the element of my book, which is sort of different than what I've read out there, is that there's this idea that sort of bars are built with the idea of if you build it, they will come, and that all sort of form and functionality stems from purpose or concept. And I think with my chapter in my book, a lot of what and with the Prairie School in Chicago, a lot of what I looked at is the neighborhood. What does the neighborhood have? What does it not have? What is the sort of style of the neighborhood and whatnot? So with respect to the bar, we are across the street from the New Ace Hotel, which sort of takes a very sort of Bauhaus, Mies van der Rohe sort of look to it, very sort of industrial and sort of stark. We're in the Google building, which is the former Fulton Street Fish Market building. So also sort of a hulking industrial building that has Google on many of the top floors. And then we're down the street from the Aviary, and sort of that group's sort of suite of restaurants next is there. And then sort of the rest of the area is a former meat market. So the buildings are quite industrial. So when we went into that space, what we were looking at was a restaurant that had left their pipes and their wires and the sort of beams all exposed. It was a very industrial looking space. And the first thing I thought to myself is, wow, so many operators actually put the bar in the wrong place, or they put the service stations in the wrong place, or there are structural elements or design elements which they put in the wrong places, which I assume lead to the decline of the restaurant. Whereas these guys actually, I think, put everything in the right place, but they didn't really spend a lot of money on decor and warming the space up. So when my partners and I sat down to talk about what we wanted to do, bringing warmth and a sort of organic feeling was a big sort of priority, and looking at Chicago's design and architecture history and heritage, Frank Lloyd Wright and the Prairie School architects really did that. So I feel like that was the idea behind bringing a Prairie School aesthetic to that space, and it started really with the neighborhood but also the city, and trying to find a concept that resonated. So in my book, a lot of what I talk about is how you can think about designing a space. Either, there's two kind of, I think, ways in which a lot of operators go about looking to open a spot. They say, I want to open an Italian restaurant, and they look for a space that's the ideal space for an Italian restaurant. or they find a beautiful space that they know is going to be a great space to open a restaurant, and they're like, what would work here? And so those were another two sort of like trains of thought that I followed in the chapter.
That's so interesting. I want to hear more about the aesthetics, but I also want to back you up because something you said fascinated me. You said that sometimes everything's in the wrong place, and that's why a restaurant or bar fails.
Yeah, so I mean, I talk in the book about simple things like, for instance, your delivery entrance for your business, ideally where a gigantic semi-truck can drop off kegs or a food order can go in, should be ideally in the back of the restaurant, as opposed to having to take delivery maybe through your dining room because those sort of hand trucks going over your carpet or the kind of polished wood floor every day for 3 hours a day does a lot of damage, and then also from there thinking about where your walk-in coolers are. Like, wow, wouldn't it be nice to receive your orders next to where your walk-ins are so you don't have to hand carry it down the stairs? Or so just thinking about everything from where you might take delivery to just the idea of merchandising. When you open a bar or restaurant, one of the things you conscientiously do if you're at a place like Clyde Common, which is long window-lined street, you don't seat someone in maybe upstairs at Clyde Commons. You'd want to seat the first 3 or 4 people along the window seats to merchandise to everyone walking by. Hey, this place it's open for business. Look at these people in the windows. They've got food and drink on their plate. They're having a great time.
No, wait. Do you do that thing I've heard about in the industry where you have the kind of attractive younger folks sit in the window?
I mean, if I don't work at none of my places are like Balthazar or some sort of like sceney place that has that is mobbed at the beginning. So I don't have the luxury of choosing the supermodels to sit in the window seats at any of my places. But certainly, you wanna. What I also said I don't think in the design chapter, but I think probably in the service and hospitality chapter, is that a bar. I find a bar to be like a mousetrap. And Audrey Saunders, one of my mentors, talked about this. And the staff that you staff your bar with are like the cheese. So if you staff your bar with all, say, rock and rollers who all have like black t-shirts and black pants and face piercings, chances are you will attract a large number of those types of guests. Or if you
tattooed mice,
exactly. So with respect to the pretty people in the front seats, if you staff your restaurant with a bunch of pretty people, you'll attract pretty people. I believe that from a service hospitality, but also even down to a design standpoint, that the best way to attract a clientele you're looking for is through your staff.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'd never thought of that.
We want to, I think, going back to the sort of social functions of bars, I think people go to bars to be together, but for the most part, I think they go to bars to be part of a tribe, or to be part of, going back to the church, sort of analogy Jeff meant. Certain bars are the Protestant bars, or the Catholic bars, or are the Baptist choir bars, or the what do you call the Tom Cruise bars, the Christian Scientists or whatever. Like the bars have that sort of denominational sort of element to them, and people know that when they go to one bar, it's going to be like drinking with the Episcopals versus the other bar, which will be like drinking with the animal worshipers. So I feel like that is one of the things they're thinking about, and I think the staff and also decor and design are one of the best ways to sort of give people clues. That sort of like ritualistic animal, sort of the design, the decor, the music, all those things. Like when the head bartender at midnight bites the head off a rat, like you sort of know what kind of bar you're drinking in.
It's funny. I have to recognize that, but also kind of disagree with it a little bit. In that, like, I think that those kind of bars that are sort of targeted or attract one type of clientele, at least in the bars that I've always run, I always feel like those as a sort of a little bit of a failure, in that like I think that the ideal perfect bar is a bar where every type of person is there. And one thing I really love about our bar, and granted this partially because of location and all this kind of stuff in downtown Portland, is that we'll have a 70-year-old couple celebrating their anniversary next to some tattooed mice, next to a group of artists, next to a bunch of like kind of jocks or whatever. And when I look out and I see that it's not just filled with a sort of like homogenized type of guest, it makes me feel really successful, like we're doing something right, that we kind of appeal to more than just the tattooed mice or the jock mice.
What I'll say, and because I actually don't think we're disagreeing with PDT and for Prairie School.
And PDT
one of the
is your bar
PDT
in
New York, and
New
Prairie Schools in Chicago. One of the things that we set to do when we opened was we wanted to have parity between men and women. We wanted to have parity between people of different color, races, sexual preferences, ages. I think when you field a diverse staff, you put yourself in a position, like you're saying, to appeal to the widest audience, so that person entertaining their parents can have a good time next to the people who just finished the death metal concert. And for me, I would agree with you, Jeff, that those are the sort of bars and restaurants that I enjoy drinking in, versus the like highly sort of specific bars that are more tribal, that are sort of like you go only drink in those types of bars. So I would actually agree with you.
Yeah, I guess disagree was the wrong term. Just sort of wanted to expand on that.
No, but you get what you staff.
Totally.
And that's why sort of from a design standpoint, staff is something you could even consider fielding a diverse staff, people who have different interests, different levels of expertise, different backgrounds. That puts you in a position to attract the widest audience, I believe.
WIDEST.
Right.
Yes. I'm just
not talking about.
Yeah.
Jim,
So, go ahead.
I'd be curious to talk about, Jim, how you design bars and what kind of setting encourages people to mix together. Like the kind of bar, like Clyde Common is this kind of bar where you walk in and there's a long bar, and so you feel like when you go there, you could end up talking to anyone who happens to be next to you. Versus a lot of bars now have kind of a living room feel, where everybody gets kind of set in their own four tops, say, or their own sort of isolated space, and it's a fantastic bar, but maybe you only go when you're with a set group. Like it's not the kind of bar you'd go to alone or with just one other person.
I would say that for me, the interesting thing about designing bars is the design of bars, and I say this, design of bars really hasn't changed fundamentally in 200 years. They all kind of, the bars have gotten longer, the stools used to be there, and then they were taken away, and now they've kind of come back, and we're still working on sort of 19th century tech. What I would say with respect to how people interact in bars, so much of that goes back to the way the bartender is. Like one of the reasons I think people talk to each other at Clyde Commons is because they're taking social cues from Jeff, or they're taking social cues from Jeff's bartenders who are super social, gregarious, kind of like, I think back to like bartenders like Beckley, who are just, they're life of the party type people who encourage other life of the party type guests. And I find that a lot of times when I go to bars, especially cocktail bars, certain cocktail bars, not all of them, it seems like I'm being served by a wizard, who is, and I feel like some of the you mentioned the artistry before, some of the artistry of the way in which we carry ourselves and the sort of very sort of like one-on-one nature of our interactions. I mean, we've all bartended for a long time, in the early days when we used to be packed, and bars weren't what they are now, the first thing that you learn as a bartender in a busy bar is when you start having to serve people 2 and 3 deep, the best thing to do is you line the first sort of level of your bar with your regulars, and then you get your regulars to basically start interacting with the people who are 2 deep. So you basically deputize all the regulars to turn around and start working for you, because you can't carry on conversations anymore. So your regulars basically entertain the guests while you run around like a crazy person serving drinks. And I think that that's something that, that deputization to talk to someone else while you're too busy to talk to them is something that is not something I see in a lot of cocktail bars.
Well, and Jeffrey, Clyde Common, we've been throwing out the name Clyde Common, we should explain. It's in downtown Portland. It's also a restaurant.
Yes.
And I was thinking about the arrangement. It's got those big communal tables, and then there's like a balcony kind of seating as well. It's very open, and so I wonder if that also contributes to the socialization of guests.
I think that the communal tables and the open kind of floor plan really do contribute to that. A lot of there are still spaces where you can kind of sneak away and have a private experience, but I think most of 75% of the space is really about community and human interaction.
And I also liked the point. I'm skipping around here, but Jim, in your book, one of your tips was that if you do booths, which kind of separate people, then have them lifted up off the floor a little bit so that there's a sight line and the people in the booths can make eye contact with is it the bartender?
Yeah, there's a guy I featured in my design chapter named Rasmus Lomberg who one of his bars, Lidkube, is featured in there. And what Rasmus said that I loved, and I might have put it in the quote, I might not, there's a lot of great interview material that didn't make the book, but he said that in his bars, he finds the worst seat in the bar, and then he sits in it and thinks about it and does everything he can to make it the best seat in the bar. And then he moves to whatever he perceives to be the next worst place. And I think there are strategies you can use to make bad seats better. And I think lighting, certainly elevation, things that you can, oftentimes the worst seats are the ones that are hardest to see the rest of the room, to see the rest of the guests, to feel part of the vibe in the room. And mirrors, height, lighting, something as simple as adding another server, so that you or making sure the server serving that table realizes that they should make an extra effort to be at that table more often because that table oftentimes feels left out or maybe doesn't get served as well because people can't see it. There are solutions to a sort of table that sort of feels out in left field.
Jacob, we haven't heard from you in a while.
Well, I think we've hit on a lot of my favorite aspects of it, and to me, one of the hardest parts of getting that good bar feel is how you encourage that interaction among strangers, if that is your goal. And there's a few places in Portland that I think really succeeded that. The Horse Press Pub would be another one.
For sure. Yeah,
very historic old English pub feel. Games could be another aspect. Having darts or something else that brings people together in the bar.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me seems like a totally different type of bar, though, from what you guys are doing, which is more just making these. I keep coming back to the beverage because I'm a beverage person, but it's really about highlighting these beautiful creations, isn't it, or is it not?
The interesting thing I would say in the last 10 years is that 10, 12 years ago, no one I liken the cocktail sort of like renaissance, if you want to call it that, to like the Korean arms race, whereas like no one had the technology to create the bomb, and so the few places you went to that had the special ice or that had the maraschino or that had the bartender who knew how to make the aviation because for whatever reason they had the knowledge and they had the technique and abilities, and for that reason you went to those bars for the drinks, and the characters who ran them could be completely despotic. And I think now just about every new restaurant that opens has, cold draft ice or has Cocktail Kingdom equipment or has, access to all these ingredients that, because we're state controlled and perhaps sort of living in the like blue law era, didn't have the ingredients. And now, so I think what we're facing now is that like, since everyone can make these drinks, the recipes are out there, the tools and glassware and ingredients are out there, what do you do to differentiate yourself? And I think we're all trying to hint at is that like the way in which you run your bar, the way in which you treat your staff, the way in which your staff treats your guests and the guests treat each other, I think what is going to be the difference between going to Multnomah or Clyde or Teardrop.
I think that parallels the coffee world a lot too. For when I lived in Washington, D.C., we basically only had one really good coffee shop where people knew how to make the kind of coffee that we take for granted now. And so it was just packed all the time, and it became this great social space where everybody came to that. Everybody would share tables, and it was just accepted. You would strike up a conversation with your neighbor. And then I came to Portland, and it's been the complete opposite, where we have so many good coffee shops that if they're not designed well, it's like being in a study hall. Like, everybody's at their own table, and to walk up and ask to share a table would be like walking up and licking someone's face. It's just, you don't do it. And so it's a real design challenge how to bring that room alive and make people talk to each other.
I think we need to finish this segment just on the visual of licking someone's face and move on to our third course. So everyone wants to go to the new bar in town with the sophisticated interior design and the oversized ice cubes. Is there a term for those? Do you just call them oversized?
We
ice
just
cubes?
call them ice cubes now.
There's a term we might have to bleep out.
Yeah.
It's the BFC.
Oh.
The big effing
Bleep.
cube of some kind, freaking cube.
Uh-huh. But at the same time, everyone loves to complain about the $18 cocktail that comes in a teeny tiny glass. So Jacob Grier, you work as a consultant advising bar owners. So I want to know from you, what are the hidden costs of running a bar? And I've heard it's a terrible, very difficult business to start up and be in. So what are the economic hurdles? Is it the ice cubes, the big ice cubes?
It can be, if that's your goal. And I certainly have the advantage of consulting, which means I get to leave after it started without too much skin in the game. But I would say to think about both your operational cost on an ongoing basis, which the cost of your product, the cost of your ice cubes, things that might break throughout your service, your labor, but then also look at the very high cost of opening the bar to begin with, which I don't think people think about as much, where it's the space, it's the design, it's construction, there's a lot of research involved, and you can have construction delays. So thinking about covering all those costs from the very beginning, where you're building a place out which could go for months or even years, as we've seen sometimes. And that's rent that the owners are paying for at least a lot of that time. And that needs to be recouped as well.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point that I just thought of while you were talking. When you're running a bar, you really don't have clientele until, 3 p.m., 4 p.m., something like that? So you've got this empty space you're paying rent
Depends
on.
the bar, but yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all varies state to state, too.
Yeah.
Like a huge part of a startup cost in California would be getting your liquor license, probably, because those are rationed out, which is a luxury we don't have to deal with here in Oregon, where it's much cheaper, but we pay a lot more for our booze as a consequence. The state taxes it on one side or the other.
So what's the most expensive thing, line item, in like a monthly budget?
I'm going to defer to Jim and Jeffrey on this one.
I mean, it depends. In a large restaurant or in a restaurant bar, I mean, if your staff, is gonna your staff costs, especially if you're employing consultants, is gonna be it's gonna be high.
Wait, they're supposed to save you money.
We make up for it in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, staff costs. I mean, I think the thing is with liquor, for instance, depending on the state, you have and food, you have 30-day terms usually, or you can negotiate those terms, whereas your staff needs to be paid every week. And so there are a lot of, like contractors, food, your spirits purveyors, a lot of stuff can be put on terms that can be somewhat, negotiable, especially if you have a good track record. But your staff needs to get paid every week, no matter how much revenue you do. So that, and it's, a place that puts their staff in a position of either asking them to wait to be paid puts them in a very precarious situation.
And the staff is not just being paid during the open hours, too. There's a lot of time that goes into both opening and closing a bar as well. So add on at least an hour, if not two, for your bar staff to your opening hours.
And I also think rent. I mean, it depends on the city you're in and the location you're in. But the advantage of being in a high traffic area is you're going to have traffic. But what I said in my design chapter is that doesn't necessarily mean that traffic is coming to the bar. Just because there are people walking by your space doesn't mean that they're more likely to come in. So I think that your staff is going to be probably the biggest one because you have to pay that every week, but in some situations it could be rent.
So the $18 cocktail, it's not because the ingredients are so expensive. It's more the larger underlying issues like rent and staff.
One of the tragic things about the $18 cocktail is that the $18 cocktail, I would argue, actually has very little to do with the cost of the cocktail. I find that cocktail costing has a lot more to do with what the market will bear. So an arugula salad in New York City used to be around $8.50 or $9. It's probably closer to like $13 now. Arugula doesn't cost very much, but that's what you can charge in New York City for an arugula salad, which is now a kale salad, but it's the same thing. So I think that the costing or the prices of the drinks have much more to do with market conditions usually than the drinks themselves.
I would say also that there should not be any $18 cocktails in Oregon. Honestly, we don't have anything even close to that sort of pricing, and we've got 2 award-winning bars. I find that anybody in Oregon, particularly Portland, that's charging that much money for a cocktail is probably trying to take advantage of, as Jim says, if the market will bear it, and these people are banking on this idea that the market will bear it, and now that there are more people in Oregon with money, that they'll come and spend $18. But I think that's a waste of everybody's time and money.
Well, I saw in Seattle there's a bar opening now with I think they call it the Millionaire's Menu, and it's all cocktails that are $100 or more.
That's dumb.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though. In Hong Kong, we just opened a PDT out there, and I have my staff and the hotel management demanding that we raise prices because people at the Mandarin want to spend. It's such a, I will say that, like, I totally agree with Jeff. This market does not want $18 cocktails. But for instance, in Hong Kong, they're looking for more tiered pricing. So we've had to change our menu from a standard cocktail price to a standard cocktail to a premium cocktail to a reserve cocktail. And that's what they're actually looking for. So I think that going back to this idea of what the market will bear, what the market conditions are, the Chinese or the Hong Kong, ease view of drinking or eating has a status element that, for instance, isn't present here in Portland. It doesn't exist here.
Although I do think consumers here do like the tiers. I'm thinking about when people go to get a margarita, they're like, oh, today's just a normal margarita day, or, today's the top shelf tequila margarita day. And it might be the same customer just depending on their mood and
yeah, I mean, I think that Multnomah Whiskey Library is a great idea. Like they have a lot of fine and rare whiskey, and so none of their drinks on the menu I don't think are $18. But if you were to say, hey, I want a Booker's Manhattan, it's not going to be whatever the cost of their regular Manhattan is. So I think the sticker shock of it of an $18 cocktail not being on the menu, but the ability to make an $18 cocktail upon request, I think is a way that I would think about operating here.
I think Oregonians are a little bit smarter too. They're tend to be more educated about all things food and drink, and know what they're getting. And if they're building, say, a Booker's Manhattan, they know what they're doing with the Booker's Manhattan. They know that that's going to be an excellent Manhattan. But I think that pound for pound, we are more educated here about food and drink than most places I've been.
And I was going to say, I don't think it's an $18 drink, but one of the more memorable cocktails I had recently was the whiskey soda, the highball, at Jim's Bar, the Prairie School in Chicago. And I'll admit, I was really skeptical going into it, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about what makes that drink special and the process you guys use, because it blew my mind when I had it. Like it was so much beyond what I expected.
When I was in Japan, they have these whiskey soda machines, which are quite
so cool.
Yeah, they're kind of big, but in an izakaya that mostly serves like tap beer, it's just they have like a giant frozen over tap where you can get like an Arctic Asahi, or you can get that one drink with spirits, which is a whiskey soda. And the Japanese whiskey industry, like 20, 30 years ago, actually created that cocktail to compete with beer because Japan was such a huge beer market. And so the drink itself is it's the same, or it's very similar ABV to a light beer.
Alcohol by volume.
Alcohol by volume, thank you. And it's the fun part about it was my friend Gardner Dunn, who works with Suntory, brought like 5 or 6 of these whiskey soda machines to the U.S. and I heard him talking about it in December. And I asked him of the 16, I guess, and I was like, "Can I have one of those? I think I could do something with this at my bar." And so we have calibrated it. You can calibrate it to within a very specific formula ratio of water to whiskey. So ours is a little bit stronger in Chicago than it is in Japan. So my head bartender Christina calls it the shy ball instead of the high ball, and. But it's really simple. It's just Japanese Suntory Toki whiskey and water. The water is both filtered and super carbonated, so it has like pinpoint sort of like champagne quality carbonation. And I think that right now, over the last few years, we've sort of experienced this sort of like, patio aperitif kind of thing going on. Like we're drinking this drink right now that has the Vermouth de Torino. And I think that people want to drink drinks that have less sugar and less alcohol. So in some ways, the whiskey soda is like super, attractive, I think, for a lot of guests.
Yeah, and the
simple.
ice you use is really special too, right? Are you buying the ice?
Well,
It's
yeah,
just a
so we have
sculpture
the
quality
ice. We have clear ice that is cut for the Collins glass, and then we stamp it with a sort of like Frank. Our logo is sort of like Frank Lloyd Wright, draftsman inspired. And I think that when you serve a drink like a whiskey soda, or for that matter, like a daiquiri or a martini, when there's only one there's more than one. When there's 2 or 3 ingredients in a drink, every element matters. So I think that when you have a 2-ingredient drink, the glass, the ice, the straw, all those things start to matter a lot more.
Yeah, it's when you know what goes into that. That makes the price of that drink, which I don't think it's $18, but it's
not $18. Yeah. It's not cheap. We have a mug, a sort of tumbler program, which brings it down to $10. Yeah. So the idea at Prairie School, going back to the cheese and the mousetrap, is to get everyone to buy a tumbler and drink $10 highballs. Which also, going back to Jeff's point about drunk people in the bar, people are drinking whiskey highballs. They're drinking more water than whiskey, which means they can be there longer and not get deleteriously drunk. So it's a drink that encourages people to not be wasted in your bar, which for me is preferable.
Well, I like that as a finishing thought as we move on to our dessert course, in which we each share something that has to do with beverages or food that we have been enjoying this week. I'll go first. I was thinking about design and color, and it reminded me that in a recent New Yorker, the March 19th issue, which you can pull up online, there's a really great article. It's called India Madhavi, Virtuoso of Color, and it's about an interior designer who has designed a bunch of restaurants, including the most Instagrammed restaurant in London, which is called Sketch. And she is obsessed with this very 1950s shade of pink, which is apparently now known as millennial pink. Have you guys heard this term?
No.
It's like the color of Pepto-Bismol, and I can't decide if I hate it or love it, but I'll see if I can show you all a picture. I know
I love it.
Everyone who's listening can't see, but you have to look it up on the New Yorker website. So yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that apparently every restaurant and bar in the coming year is going to have Pepto-Bismol pink furniture and walls, so prepare yourself. So that's my dessert for today. Jacob, what did you bring as a closing thought?
I'm going to bring it down.
Okay.
Really down. I was in Copenhagen recently doing some bar hopping, and so I decided to read a book from 1930 from a Danish poet named Tom Christensen called Havoc. And it's all about the interwar period in Denmark and a literary critic who has a good life, a good job, a wife, a child, and then he just descends into alcoholism, and it's nothing but 500 pages of his just self-obliteration of going to the old dirty brown bars of Copenhagen.
Oh no.
Yeah, so Scandinavia is a really happy place now, but all their classic lit seems really dark. So if you're ever feeling too good about things, I'd say pick up this book.
And did it make you want to quit your job and find a whole new career?
No, it was good, and it definitely brought to life the contrast between the kind of modern, happy, fancy cocktail bars in Copenhagen now, and then where we ended the night, where you just drink shots and beer.
Well, thank you, I think. Jeffrey, what did you bring for
On a lighter note, my dessert is an actual dessert, drink inspired. I enjoy a scoop of vanilla ice cream with Pedro Jimenez dessert sherry poured all over the top of it in a sort of affogato fashion, and giant flecks of Jacobsen sea salt on top.
Yum.
Would not say no to that.
Yeah.
That's a little happier than that.
I'm a happy guy. This is a really good book. It brought a scene to life.
And I have a sweet tooth.
And now I want to open a bar called Havoc.
Yeah.
And actually, I was just reading, there's some book that's coming out that analyzes the most used words of authors, and I guess Vladimir Nabokov's favorite word was mauve, which is interesting.
Mauve?
Mauve.
The color.
The color.
He didn't know about millennial pink, though.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So maybe he was all over it. My dessert is, it's embarrassing to sort of admit it on the radio, but I'm about halfway through. I've had it since it came out, but Dan Barber's book, The Third Plate, And I don't know if you guys have read it or for anyone who's listening, I think it's the fact that Dan Barber as a chef writes the way he does is incredible. He's such an amazing storyteller. But his book is essentially about eating and a lot of it is really about farming. But it's just a fascinating book about how we eat and how we should think about what we eat and where our food comes from and seeds. He recently just launched his own seed company. And so for those of you who haven't read this book, like embarrassing myself, get it and check out his new seed company.
I haven't read it, so thank you.
It's fantastic.
That's a good reminder. Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Jim Meehan. You're also the author of the PDT cocktail book, and as we mentioned, a partner in PDT New York, PDT Hong Kong, Prairie School in Chicago, and you're also the mixologist behind those fancy American Express Centurion lounges in airports, aren't you?
Free cocktails, guys.
And Jeffrey Morgenthaler, you manage the bar at Clyde Common in downtown Portland, and you also have another book called The Bar Book, Elements of Cocktail Technique. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And Jacob Grier, who in addition to being an author and cocktail consultant, also writes for publications such as Imbibe, Distiller, and Slate. And you have a book that you're working on too.
Yes, at least one. Hopefully be out within the year.
Thanks for being here, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Today's episode was recorded in the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon, in the Aria Gin Tasting Room on Northwest 23rd Avenue. You can read all about us on the OPB website. Our editor and sound supervisor today is Alex Ward, and our theme music was performed by the incomparable wine importer Kermit Lynch. Okay, people, if you like our James Beard Award-winning show, please rate us on iTunes, subscribe to The Four Top on your favorite podcast app, and tell your friends about us. You can tweet us, check out our Instagram, or visit our Facebook page, and post your thoughts about the show. We'd love to hear from you. Bye-bye.
Nuit blanche, nuit blanche, nuit blanche.
I don't talk about tipping.